Welcome back to Marvel Maniac, an MCU after show. This is your host, Eric Cicada, aka Mr. Honest, back with you with another episode about a small hero who has a huge impact. This is Ant-Man and the Wasp journey through the MCU. Ant-Man has a big impact on the events of the Infinity Saga, and yet he is only introduced at the very end of Phase 2. So let's talk about his journey and along with the Wasp and see what greater impact they've had on the Marvel Cinematic Universe, a lot of the things we learned throughout their story, and where their story just so happens to be going with Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania coming out this week. I love Ant-Man as a hero, and it was one of the first times I was thinking Marvel is really stepping outside the box and taking some chances on some of their properties. In the comics, Ant-Man was originally an Avenger, and he was technically going to be with the Avengers a little bit earlier on. However, the people at the MCU decided to wait a little bit longer to put him into the mix. The original Ant-Man in the first Ant-Man movie was Hank Pym, and we learned that Hank Pym has been operating as Ant-Man for years. And Scott Lang, when we get to him, he is just the next in line of taking that mantle, kind of setting up superhero roles in the MCU to be able to be taken by other heroes and not let the name of the hero die with that hero when they go. Maybe setting the stage a little bit for Sam Wilson as Captain America coming up in New World Order. Sorry for the spoilers, but it's kind of well known now that Sam Wilson is our next Cap. But for me, the definitive Ant-Man is Scott Lang, Paul Rudd. And I remember thinking, how is Paul Rudd going to be part of the MCU? Age of Ultron just came out, a very dramatic Avengers movie. A lot was at stake, the whole world. And how are we going to go from this to that? And in terms of like what we got, it was really great. I thought it was a lighthearted movie with a lot of lore. And in the first Ant-Man movie, we learned of the quantum realm. We learned of Pym particles. And it's just a really fun heist movie. Scott Lang is a former convict, and he was kind of doing a Robin Hood kind of thing where he was working for a company that was kind of stealing from its customers, so he decided to steal back from the rich and give back to the poor, that locking him up in jail for 3 years. Now, I did watch a video on Screen Crush on YouTube, and they pointed out the amount of time that Scott is like jailed across these movies and kind of under house arrest, and you start with 3 years and you move on later and you find out that, like, let's just jump ahead. Scott Lang misses a total of 10 years with his daughter throughout the course of these movies, just either being on arrest or being away from her in her life. So I'm going to credit Screen Crush on YouTube for that little piece of information. I probably wouldn't have even gone on to rant about it on this podcast if it weren't for that video. So go check Screen Crush out. One of my favorite sources. Ryan Airy is so good at breaking down pretty much anything you want to know about any Marvel property. So inspiring. Anyway, so Scott Lang goes to jail for 3 years previous to even meeting him. So he's missing out on his daughter Cassie's life, which we find out that Cassie is just the driving force of Scott Lang. Everything Scott does in these movies is really for his daughter. You know what? I can immediately go back on that a little bit. Like, if Scott was thinking maybe a little bit more clearly, maybe he wouldn't have gone to fight with the Avengers in Civil War with Captain America, because that got him in a lot of trouble. But back to that in a bit. We're going to go back to Ant-Man that came out in 2015 at the end of Marvel Cinematic Universe's Phase 2, the final movie of Phase 2, where Hank Pym and Janet Van Dyne, his wife, were on a mission to stop a nuclear weapon from hitting the United States. They were under the names Ant-Man and the Wasp at the time. And the only way to disarm this nuke was to do something that in the movie Hank warns Scott against, and that's going subatomic. And there's a regulator on the Ant-Man suit that stops him from going this small, because you will enter a void in space that is impossible to get back from, that we learned to be the quantum realm. And in the first Ant-Man movie, we don't know how big of an importance this is going to be. It's kind of this like hypnotic place that we never really had seen before up to this point, and it was kind of just bigger than us. So the quantum realm as a concept to begin with was just so awe-inspiring. Like, whoa, there's this whole other element to the Marvel Cinematic Universe that we yet to even know about. And it's interesting for a character like Ant-Man, such a small character, literally, to be the one to bring us there. And such a comedic character. And they don't hold back from letting Scott Lang, played by Paul Rudd, they don't stop from letting him be really funny. And whether that be some of the lines he delivers, like giving his first ant a name called Antony, one of my favorites, and he goes on to do that in later movies with like Ulysses S. Grant. I love that. Paul Rudd brings so much to the role of Scott Lang. It's almost like Iron Man, where it's like Ant-Man is Paul Rudd, like Robert Downey Jr. is Iron Man. And I think Marvel goes to great lengths to like build a world around the actor that's playing that role to make it feel so natural. Along with Evangeline Lilly as the Wasp, Hope Van Dyne, who lost her mother, and she didn't really know why up until this movie. And she kind of held resentment towards her dad from not letting her take on the Ant-Man role. The Wasp is something that her dad didn't want her to become because he didn't want to lose his daughter like he lost his wife into the quantum realm or anything like that. Just on a mission, she gave up everything. His wife Janet did give up everything for her daughter and the United States, technically, because she saved the world in a sense by stopping that nuke. But Hank also gave up everything, Hank Pym, and he can't lose anything else. So this kind of goes into why he takes on another protege named Darren Cross and brings him into Pym Technology. I think it's called Pym Technologies in the movie. If I'm wrong, correct me, or don't. You don't have to correct me. I don't really care. But this is where we meet Darren Cross, who goes on to kind of go like above Hank's head and start to create his own technology similar to the Ant-Man. And Hank never really tells Darren about Ant-Man. He keeps it a secret. He says it's just a tall tale. All the while, Darren, throughout, however long in the background, he's creating this technology called the Yellow Jacket that is attempting to do exactly what Ant-Man does, shrink, and he's remaking Pym particles, something that Hank has been working on since the 1970s or 80s, and this is Hank Pym's technology. So this is where we get our hero being born. Scott Lang being kind of the criminal in a sense that he is. He's like I said, kind of like a Robin Hood. He gets tasked to go steal something, and little does he know it's like a setup to steal the Ant-Man suit from Hank Pym. It sounded like I said Ant-Man soup, and I said Ant-Man suit. And Ant-Man soup sounds disgusting. The Ant-Man suit is stolen by Scott Lang, and it is like completely set up by Hank Pym just to kind of see if Scott's capable. Scott does his heist with his kind of workmates, Lewis, Kurt, and Dave, and they're kind of really great comedic relief when Lewis recaps to Scott how he got him this gig. It kind of goes back and recaps like everyone who talked in this scenario with Lewis's voice going over them. That is a great running joke throughout these two movies, Ant-Man and the Wasp. And I wonder if they're going to do anything like that again in this third one. The second one seems to pay off a lot of homage to the first movie. And, while one Captain America can be wildly different in theme and tone to another, both the Ant-Man movies, Ant-Man and the Wasp, they kind of carry a familiar tone. We also get a really nice cameo from Peggy Carter and Howard Stark at the beginning of the movie, where we see a young Hank Pym kind of denying them his technology, which kind of explains why we haven't heard of Ant-Man up to this point, and he's been kind of just in the background. So Darren Cross, Hank Pym's protege, is using the technology that he's creating for evil, and he wants to weaponize these suits, these Ant-Man suits called the Yellow Jackets, and basically sell them to Hydra. So he's gone full supervillain in a short period of time. He even like uses his technology to like zap a guy into like nothing in the bathroom floor, and he wipes him up with a paper towel. Darren Cross is set up to be kind of like a really big supervillain, and we lose him. And we lose him in a very similar way to how we lose the Red Skull, and that he is kind of zapped away into a portal at the end of this movie, and we don't see from him again until possibly a later point. So he enters the quantum realm because he loses his mind when he finds out that Scott is planning a heist with Hope, who's working for him at that point, and Hank, his former mentor, he loses it, and he decides to put on the suit and go full supervillain against Ant-Man. He even goes directly to Ant-Man's daughter's Cassie's house to like take her hostage. I don't know what his game plan here is. He just snapped and wanted to get revenge on Scott Lang for kind of taking his spot as the next Ant-Man, because once like Darren Cross learns that Ant-Man was a thing, he goes full force on the Yellow Jacket, and he starts shooting lasers at Scott, and they have a fight in a helicopter. There's a whole great action sequence where like they're fighting on a miniature train set. The whole finale of this movie is just on the bedroom floor of Cassie's room, and this is when Scott realizes the only thing he can do to disable the suit is to go subatomic, because he can't break into the suit and shut it down. So he goes into Darren Cross's suit and shuts it down subatomic, bringing them both into the quantum realm. Scott being trapped in there, like not knowing what to do for a few seconds, going deeper and deeper into this wild dimension of many shapes that we've yet to see in any Marvel movie, like I said, until he realizes he has one of his objects that can make things bigger and or smaller. So he puts it into his belt, where the regulator would be, and he comes out of the quantum realm, proving to Hank that it is possible to come back from going into the quantum realm and going that size. Because up until this point, when Hank lost his wife, he figured that there is no way of ever getting her back. One of the best parts of this movie was when Ant-Man was going on a heist to steal some stuff from an old Stark compound, which ended up being our modern day Avengers facility. And who was on guard? The Falcon. And we get our first like hero on hero fight post Avengers, and we did not expect this coming. And guess what? Ant-Man whips the Falcon's butt, goes into his suit, and takes him down from the inside. Kind of becomes Ant-Man's signature thing throughout the next few movies, in that he knows how to get around super suits and shut them down from the inside, like heist style. And Falcon's like, you better never tell Cap about this. It's just it was so good to see the new compound right away, because that was established in the previous movie. And another reference to Age of Ultron was Hank Pym telling Scott, like, aren't the Avengers too busy dropping cities on people's heads? So there's like a little lead into the conflict of Ant-Man's next appearance in Civil War. But the post-credit scene of this movie was Hank Pym introducing Hope to the Wasp suit. So we knew the Wasp is on her way by the end of this film. And he said, I think we were always making it for you, me and your mom. So we get the Wasp finally being introduced in the first Ant-Man movie at the very end. She doesn't suit up in this one, but we do see the old Wasp, Janet, in action for a small amount of time in a flashback in this movie, which there's like an opening in the second Ant-Man where we kind of get to see this scene in way more detail, which is really cool. We get to see Scott again in his next outing in Captain America Civil War that was released on May 6, 2016. And this movie needs to be talked about on its own in another episode, which I haven't done a Captain America Civil War episode yet. I will get to that eventually, but we can talk a little bit about this movie. The Sokovia Accords need to be put in place because the Avengers have been causing a lot of destruction in their superhero battles. So the Battle of New York, the Battle of Sokovia with Ultron, and then there's a thing that happens in Lagos in this movie where Scarlet Witch accidentally bombs a building and hurts innocent Wakandans. This is where we meet Wakandans and Wakanda and the Black Panther. Even we meet him in this movie. This movie we meet our new Spider-Man, Peter Parker, Tobey Maguire. I almost said Tobey Maguire, Tom Holland. I think I do want to see Tobey Maguire as Spider-Man more. So I'll let that Freudian slip stick. Maybe as a little bit of good luck to see more Tobey Maguire Spider-Man. Even though Tom Holland Spider-Man is great. We meet so many people in this movie that by the time Ant-Man shows up in the movie to assist Steve Rogers in getting through an airport so Steve Rogers can go do what he thinks is right, what he knows is right. He knows somebody is pulling the strings, that being Baron Zemo. Baron Zemo sets it up to look like Bucky assassinated King T'Chaka of Wakanda, also making the Black Panther very, very angry at Captain America and Bucky, the Winter Soldier. Where does Scott Lang play a part in this? Well, at the end of the first Ant-Man, we learn that Falcon, through one of Lewis's famous recaps, voiceover recaps, we learn that the Falcon is looking for Ant-Man, and Ant-Man shows up just at the right moment of Civil War, where Cap is assembling his team, and Falcon pulls him out of the back of a van where he's sleeping. Ant-Man is definitely just in the wings. We don't really get any of the outside story of how he got there. We just know that he is down to help Captain America. When he gets to see Captain America for the first time, we almost feel his excitement, and he is like Captain America's squire in this movie, and he pulls off so many moves that actually help Cap get through the airport and to his destination, where all the other Winter Soldiers are about to be released by Zemo. That's what Cap thinks is about to happen. We later know that Zemo is just trying to tear the Avengers apart, which he does a very good job of doing. But the main thing that Scott does in this, well, he does go in Iron Man's suit, and he, another signature move of his, he goes in Iron Man's suit and messes him up for a little bit. He gets shot off of Hawkeye's arrow in this movie, and he lands and strikes punches from there. And the biggest thing he does literally is turn into Giant Man, where he turns humongous, bigger than the airplane that he's crushing with his foot. My favorite line is my favorite part is when Tony's like, does anyone have any new or miraculous abilities similar, does anyone have anything they're hiding that they would like to present? Now would be a good time, because this is just the most outrageous thing in the world, having this giant man fight our Avengers. It's over the top, and Tony did not see this coming, even though Tony brought Spider-Man to the party. Giant Man was the highlight of that fight. The fact that he held down for so long up until Peter Parker decided to pull an Empire Strikes Back on him, and that really old movie Empire Strikes Back, and take Scott Lang down. And when you just get to see Scott's mindset for just a second, when he gets out of Giant Man form and he pulls his mask up and he says, does anybody have any orange slices? It's a football game. He's just going out to spar with the Avengers, and that kind of goes to show that when Captain America needed his help, as he goes on to say later, one of my favorite running things in these movies to Endgame, I'll point out that he tells Hope later, Cap needed my help. And she's like, Cap? You're calling him Cap? And then at the end of Avengers Endgame, when Hope and Scott meet again, Cap gives an order over the radio, and Hope replies to him, sure thing, Cap. And Scott and Hope share this quick moment, looking at each other yeah, I get it. We can call him Cap. My favorite thing about the MCU is when they lay out moments early on in some movies and they pay off in others at times you don't even expect them to. Civil War happens, and 2 years later, on July 6th, 2018, we get Ant-Man and the Wasp. Now, Ant-Man and the Wasp came out after Avengers Infinity War, but takes place directly before it, chronologically, until its post-credit scene. So Ant-Man is on house arrest. He's been on house arrest for 2 years since the incident at the airport with Captain America. And we get to meet Jimmy Woo in this movie, who we later get to see in WandaVision. Jimmy explains to Cassie why Scott is on house arrest, and it's because he was, writing on the walls with Captain America. Ant-Man and the Wasp starts with Hank and Hope deciding to go into the quantum realm and find her mother and his missing wife, deciding that she could still very much be down there alive and well, and that they could save her, considering Scott came back in the first movie from the quantum realm. We later learn in this movie that quantum entanglement happened and Janet left a message inside of Scott's head, and it was kind of like GPS coordinates on how to find her. This happened when Scott went into the quantum realm in the last movie. So up until Hank and Hope learn that Scott can kind of help them, they're not really talking to Scott because they're a little PO'd at what Scott did in Germany. He took the Ant-Man suit to go help Captain America, which was against the law, and got them all in trouble because it was Hank Pym's technology. So him and Hope are just directly associated with Scott, and they're on the run in this movie thanks to Scott and what he did. And we later learn that Hope maybe would have liked a call from Scott to go to Germany to help Captain America, and she says, imagine how we would have done together there. It makes you think. Scott didn't bring his girlfriend, the Wasp, to the giant superhero battle, and she was jealous. Hank Pym, played by Michael Douglas, which I think it's a treasure that we get Michael Douglas in the MCU. He certainly has made some enemies throughout his time, being a scientist, and just through his experiments in time, working on things. He has some people that he parted ways with, like we all do. We all part ways with people. However, in this movie, he parted ways with someone he was working on a quantum tunnel with, and this guy, was so bitter that he didn't get to continue his work that he kept working on his own quantum tunnel, and this ended up really hurting him. Literally, it took his life, and his daughter Ava, who in this movie we get to see this in a flashback, gets subjected to all this quantum energy from the quantum realm, so she becomes who we get to know as Ghost, and she's kind of always shifting in and out of reality and being rebuilt. She's maybe different multiverse versions of herself are constantly shifting in and out of our reality. So I'm assuming maybe we'll learn a little bit more about her later, because they kind of set her up as a character in this movie, and we don't really get to see her ever again up to this point where we are in the MCU, however many movies later, 20 movies later. So I don't know when and if we're going to see Ava / Ghost again, but she's kind of the conflict in this movie where Dr. Bill Foster, played by Lawrence Fishburne, he was another former colleague of Hank Pym's. He helps Ava because he knew her father, and she's trying throughout the movie and throughout her life to help stabilize her. But S.H.I.E.L.D. ends up using Ghost as a Winter Soldier style agent, and she's pretty much just used her whole life. So by the end of this movie, she's basically being torn apart and being brought back together so much through quantum, with whatever the quantum realm did to her, that she's gonna die probably within a month. So she basically needs Hank Pym's technology and lab to fix whatever she has, this quantum virus she has. So she's kind of chasing them throughout the entire movie, along with a character named Sonny Birch, who is a black market dealer and is the one who's selling Hope and Hank their parts to build their lab. The lab is transportable and a mini briefcase that you can move around, and it's definitely moved a lot around throughout this movie and stolen by all the interested parties. So you have the black market dealers, and you have Ghosts, and then you have Jimmy Woo and the FBI all at play here. In this kind of heist-like movie where everyone's trying to get to the lab, and Hope and Hank finally learn how to get to Janet in the quantum realm by the end of the movie, and Hank goes into the quantum realm and finds his wife, and she is embedded with some sort of superpower that can heal anything that's quantum related. So she is able to put her hand on Ghost's head at the end of the movie and fix her problem. This is really cool. And towards the end of the movie, another thing that Scott does is he turns extra giant, bigger than we've ever seen him, kind of setting up him doing that at a later point, maybe to punch a giant floaty alien monster in the face. He turns into Giant Man to get this lab back just in time for Hank to get out of the quantum realm. This movie was a lot of fun. It had a lot to it, and it brought a lot to the world of Marvel in a time where a big Avengers movie just happened where it was kind of dark. Not as, Age of Ultron wasn't as dark as Infinity War. Maybe darker in tones and themes than in Infinity War. Yet at the end of Infinity War, we lose everything. And in the post-credit scene for Ant-Man and the Wasp, we get two post-credit scenes. The first one being Hank, Janet, and Hope are sending Scott into the quantum realm in this new quantum realm van that they made, and he's going to collect healing particles for Ghost. So again, Ghost is mentioned even in the post-credits scene of this movie, and then we never hear about her again. So I'm assuming we will at one point. But the reason Scott is going in there is to collect healing particles for her. And when he goes in, he's on the radio just fine with everyone on the outside. But at that exact moment, everyone is snapped away by Thanos. And Scott is stuck in the quantum realm. And that's where we leave him at the end of Ant-Man and the Wasp. Not the happiest place. The day is saved and everything is happy. And the whole movie is bright and cheery up until the point where Thanos, another entity from another huge movie that just happened, we almost let ourselves forget that's going to happen. Everyone is just gone, and that is just such a devastating blow to Scott. But we don't know how that's going to play out for Scott. We don't know how Scott's going to get out of there. I loved that there was a year between Infinity War and Endgame. It really let us feel the loss of those heroes in Infinity War. And the fact that we got a follow-up / prequel in Ant-Man and the Wasp, it was such a much-needed, light Marvel experience in comparison to Infinity War, where we lost so much. Only to lose it again and have that same impact we brought back at the end of this movie, take away our hope and bring us back to the present and the real threat at hand, which is Thanos. How are we going to deal with him? And then later we got Captain Marvel, and then hence Endgame, where Scott Lang plays a big part. Avengers Endgame was released on April 22nd, 2019, and we see the fallout from the snap, and it immediately, our Avengers go take out Thanos on the planet that he was hiding out, and we get the big 5 years later in Avengers Endgame that brings us to our present year right now, 2023. It's kind of crazy to think about that it's been 5 years since 2018's Avengers Endgame in May. And when Thanos snaps in 2018, it brings us to the 5 years later, which is our 2023. So if you want to think as a reference point, it's been that amount of time now. And this is the year that the Avengers assemble to go back in time and get those stones and fix everything that Thanos did. Where does Scott Lang play in all this? Well, he plays the most, if not the integral part to making this all happen. He is the one who brings forth Hank Pym's technology to the table to meet Tony Stark, someone who has never really worked directly with Pym technology separately. And what is the thing that takes Scott out of the quantum realm? It's a rat. And this is fate at hand here. 5 years later, Scott gets zapped out of his van in a storage shelter, and this is another 5 years lost with Cassie. He runs to find out if Cassie was eliminated. And by the way, we get Ken Jeong from Community, he's a security guard that helps Ant-Man out of the storage facility. He doesn't. We assume he helps him. We see him in the office, and there's a lot of homage in the Russo brother Marvel movies to the cast of Community, and we get two in this movie. We get him, and then we get Shirley later. When Steve and Tony are at the military facility in their second time travel attempt to get the Tesseract. Anyways, that's just a little tidbit off course, off topic. I'll have a whole other episode about Endgame at one point just to pay homage to it. It's an amazing movie, but Ant-Man's part in Endgame is so important because he immediately, once he finally reunites with Cassie, who we lost another 5 years with, which we can add the first 3 years at the beginning of Ant-Man with the 2 years on house arrest in Ant-Man and the Wasp, and now 5 years that Cassie was on Earth living without Scott. That's 10 years that Scott lost with his daughter Cassie, and Cassie is like almost like, it looks like she's like 18 now. I feel like they aged her up a little bit more in Endgame from where she was in Ant-Man and the Wasp, just helping us feel how Scott feels, just even that much more like, wow, Scott missed out on like his daughter's entire life. But that really isn't addressed in Endgame because Scott realizes what actually happened at one point, that Hope, Janet, Hank are all gone through the snap, and what he has been doing in the quantum realm can probably, with all the movies he's seen, like Back to the Future and everything, and the fact that he was there for 5 hours, which timed out to be 5 years by the time he got out, Scott is able to put together that this can lead to time travel, and I want to go back in time and fix this. So he brings it directly to the Avengers facility, and I remember that being the end of the trailer in Endgame, where Scott Lang is like, "Hey, it's me, Scott Lang. You know, we fought together. Do you remember me?" He brings this idea to the table, to which he's like, "I know this is crazy," and Black Widow's like, "I get emails from a talking raccoon. You know, nothing's really crazy." And he's like, he wants to do a time heist, and they bring it to Tony Stark, and he's like, "Do you think, don't you think that's like laughable? Isn't a time heist like a laughable idea?" Tony firmly puts them down, and Scott and co recruit the Hulk. Professor Hulk, which in this movie was a shocking reveal. We had a few shocking reveals in this movie, from Professor Hulk to Big Thor. At the time, I insensitively called him Fat Thor, being a fat guy myself. Not in an insulting way, just owning it. Just like Thor does at one point. He loses all that weight. I would like to get on the Thor train. So before they get Tony Stark on it with them, like on their side, they're doing with Professor Hulk and Black Widow and Steve, they're doing trials with the quantum technology that they have. They're just doing what they can, and while trying to do time travel, they end up pushing time through Scott, where Scott is like turned into a little baby, an old man, a kid, and Scott like pees himself in the process. Poor Scott Lang, however, he's a willing participant to just go back in time and fix what was done from the very beginning. Scott Lang is driven on fixing what happened. So he is an Avenger. Scott Lang is finally an Avenger by Endgame, working with our main heroes, the original heroes from the first Avengers movie, to get our fallen heroes back. Eventually, Iron Man invents time travel, and he rejoins the Avengers. He only wants peace, he says, and they do end up pulling off a time heist. Scott Lang goes back to the Battle of New York and does what he does best. He goes into Iron Man's like chest, light, the thing that powers Iron Man, like Iron Man's heart at this point, and he gives him a mild cardiac dysrhythmia, as Iron Man puts it. And the heist that he does with Tony doesn't really work out. It ends up setting up the events for Loki. So we can thank Ant-Man for the TV show Loki as well. In that Hulk smashes down the stairs, and at the exact moment, I mean, it wasn't really Ant-Man who caused Iron Man to be there when the Hulk smashed out of the stairs. dropping the Tesseract, and hence Loki getting away, spinning off into a whole crazy series of events that lead to the creation of the multiverse. And that is kind of important in that Loki leads to He Who Remains. I won't go too far into He Who Remains, for those who haven't seen Loki, but those who have seen Loki and have seen the trailers for Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania definitely see some similarities. That's all I'll say at this exact moment, although next week's episode talking about Quantumania, we're going to go all into that, so there will be full spoilers for Loki next week. So the Avengers complete the time heist, and all hope is restored in the universe when half the universe is snapped back, except for the fact that Thanos is brought from 2014 through Nebula, who snuck her way back with the Avengers in their time heist. The Nebula switched places, and a giant war must take place between Thanos' army and our returning Avengers, in which we get to see Giant Man punch one of the giant floaty aliens from Avengers. They have names. I think it's called, like, they're Leviathans or something like that. We also get the Wasp doing some amazing things in Endgame. She has help. That part where all the female Avengers get together. The Wasp comes out at the perfect time and does what she does best. Jumping out of being small into being big and punching things in the face. And that moment where, don't worry, Cap, we got this. I love the camaraderie between Ant-Man and the Wasp, and to get to see them fight together on a battlefield at the end of Endgame, helping restore what Scott lost at the end of Ant-Man and the Wasp. It also helps Scott have a full round story in Endgame, and at the end of Endgame we get to see Scott Lang, Hope, and his daughter Cassie sitting out looking at the sky. So we leave them on a very happy note. Although Cassie is much older now, Scott has everything he lost back at the end of Avengers Endgame. We'll come back on this show to Avengers Endgame. I could talk about that movie for a long time. So we get Ant-Man's story starting all the way at the end of Phase 2 and continuing onward, being the first movie of Phase 5. So Ant-Man is like an OG Avenger at this point, and he's earned his stars and stripes and badges as an Avenger. So going forward in for the future of Ant-Man, he is kind of legendary in the MCU. Like, he is part of the stories being told of who saved the world and who brought back half the population. And Scott Lang's story is known. In my recap episode for Phase 4, I mentioned when I was talking about Miss Marvel, how Scott Lang, I said he had a book at Avengers Con, and it's actually a podcast that was being talked about. Scott Lang has a podcast, so hopefully we learn a little bit about that in the next movie. I can only hope that in Quantumania we get to see how Scott is dealing with being a superhero now, an actual superhero, to where in Avengers Endgame, before the big fight, everyone's wanted to take a picture with Hulk, and nobody really knows who Ant-Man is at that point. And now we're going to get to see what life is like for him when he's kind of Tony Stark level known. Like, he didn't snap Thanos away and sacrifice himself like Black Widow did, or Tony did. However, he's fought on the front lines with the Avengers and contributed to the saving of not even the world, but the universe, when he brought back half of all the population through his idea of a time heist. So if there was no Ant-Man, that probably never would have happened. If there was no rat to step on that switch to pull Ant-Man out of the quantum realm at the right time in Endgame. Now we have a new villain coming forth in Quantumania called Kang the Conqueror, and he's kind of presented in the trailers as like, a neutral party, but we do in later trailers see them kind of throwing down, and it never looked so personal. For Ant-Man, it never looked so personal. This might be a darker movie for him. With all the comedy we get in the first two, this seems to be more of a stage setter for Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. And it's still Ant-Man and the Wasp. It's not just Ant-Man. It's Ant-Man and the Wasp, and it kind of always has been. Hope Van Dyne has been in the Ant-Man movies from the first movie, kicking butt. She's teaching Scott Lang how to fight in the first movie, so she is trained, and she is such a cool hero in that of her. So I hope we don't lose any of these heroes. As much as like it would be really cool and probably brave for us to lose someone in this movie, man, would that really suck to lose the Wasp. There is a Marvel Zombies episode where I'm worried there's like foreshadowing to losing the Wasp, like losing the Wasp is an absolute point in time. What if Hank loses the Wasp? Hank and Scott. I meant to say Scott. But what if we lose Hope in this movie to Kang, at the hands of Kang? That would be very, very hard for Scott. And it would kind of set the tone for what Kang does to Avengers, which is that he defeats them. In one of the trailers, I've seen a clip online where Kang says, "Are you an Avenger? Have I killed you before?" So I don't know if that's going to make the movie. Sometimes Marvel advertisements will put things in like the trailers. Like, for example, in Avengers Infinity War, you see the Hulk running with the Avengers at the end of the movie, when that never happens. We never get the Hulk in the Battle of Wakanda, but he is in the trailers fighting at the Battle of Wakanda, making for an alternate glimpse into an alternate universe, but also giving the audience expectations of something that doesn't even happen. Like, they sometimes paint scenes in Marvel trailers and movies to look like completely different backgrounds from the setting that we're actually going to get in the movie. So if you think this trailer is giving away a little bit too much, well, in my opinion, I think the Ant-Man and the Wasp trailer probably gave away a little too much compared to Marvel trailers. I will say that they could go ahead and change everything from the trailer, and it'll be a huge surprise. I think the reasoning in the Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania trailer revealing so much is that this is probably a very important staple movie for Marvel fans to go watch going forward, and it's going to be like the rest of the story of the multiverse saga will probably hinge on this first movie of Phase 5, that being Quantumania. And I think we're going to be talking about Quantumania for years, and I'm hoping it's as good as it's looking to be. You don't want to set your hopes up too high, because you want to be impressed, and Marvel usually does that. The trailer is, while it being revealing, it looks like a damn good movie. I can only hope we get more Ant-Man going forward past Quantumania. It's hard to say or predict what's going to happen past the movie you haven't seen yet. That movie Quantumania is gonna have so much significance and so much in it. But for the future of Ant-Man, I really hope that we get at least another Ant-Man movie past Quantumania and more of him in the Avengers. But thinking that far ahead is a little crazy, having not seen the next one yet. Pym particles, the quantum realm, quantum entanglement. We've went through all of Ant-Man and the Wasp's journey today. And I think Scott Lang losing 10 years with his daughter is huge. If you add that time together, going into Quantumania, and what Scott's motivations are going to be as a human being, let alone a hero, and what Scott has always stood for was his family. While he's made some mistakes along the way, it's always been with the best of intentions. I don't think he saw Captain America as any bit of a threat, and the fact that Captain America needed his help in Civil War, and he answered, just goes to show that he's gonna help the good guy in his eyes, at any and all costs. So I'm looking forward to seeing where his story goes, and along with the Wasp could probably carry her own movie eventually. Lily, she deserves that, but to have her not with Scott Lang is just awkward, because they're similar heroes, and well, I think it's important that they stay together. I think they're like a Batman and Robin. Just because they're lovers doesn't mean they're not partners as well. And I think they're essential to each other. It's going to be really sad if we lose one of them. What if we lose Ant-Man in Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania? That will be really hard. I can't imagine Scott actually losing his daughter after all this. It doesn't seem fair. However, at the end of Avengers Endgame, we lose Tony, and in that very movie, Tony says he'd like to get out of this without losing his life, and that doesn't it doesn't go that way for Tony. So anything can happen, and Marvel will probably hurt us a little bit going forward in the multiverse saga. I just know we're going to lose a couple of heroes after everything they've brought in. We need the drama as well. So I'm cautiously optimistic going forward, but I can only know that there's great stories to come. And thank you for listening today to this special episode of Marvel Maniac and MCU After Show, where we look at Ant-Man and the Wasp journey through the MCU. Next time we will be talking about Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, the start-off point of Phase 5. It's just an exciting time to be a fan of Marvel right now. And don't forget, wherever you're listening, give us a rating so we can get out to as many listeners as possible. Join the discussion. Email me at marvelmaniacpod@gmail.com. Let me know your thoughts on Ant-Man and where you want to see him go in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or any of your Marvel thoughts. We do have a Patreon, patreon.com/marvelmaniac. This is Eric Cicada, your host, aka Mr. Honest, and it has been my pleasure. Until next time, Avengers, disassemble.